Part 1. The first day at Jamno Yulia Medical Center. Though Younjung plays Young, a determined and bright young woman who enters Jamno Yulia Medical Center as a first-year resident in the obstetrics and gynecology department. She is joined by 3 other fresh residents. Shin Xia as the gentle but anxious Pyo Nam Kyung, Han Yi Ji as the spirited and outspoken Kim Sa Bai, and Kong Yu Sok as the calm and observant JL. Cha Kong Yoon plays Tak Ki-an, a senior doctor whose stern presence commands respect across the department. From the very beginning, the hospital's fast pace overwhelmed them. They were no longer students, but full-fledged doctors expected to respond to emergencies, evaluate patients, and handle the emotional weight of childbirth and gynecological care. The walls of Jamno Yulia echoed with urgency, nurses darting across hallways, professors speaking in clipped tones, and the never-ending beeping of monitors and pagers. Yi Young and her fellow first-years were thrown right into the action. There was no easing into their new reality. Every minute was scheduled, and every moment held the potential for life-altering decisions. Their initial task seemed simple: join the morning rounds. However, it quickly became apparent that even this required flawless preparation. Rounds began strictly at 7 a.m., and the professors made no exceptions. The female residents, Yi Young, Nam Kyung, and Sa Bai, were responsible for presenting the patient cases. It was a nerve-wracking task, as their presentations were closely scrutinized by senior doctors like Professor Seo and Tak Ki-an. Yi Young stood stiffly during her first report, her hands trembling slightly as she described a patient's preterm contractions. Her delivery was hesitant but accurate, earning a nod of acknowledgement. By mid-morning, exhaustion began to set in. The young doctors hadn't even touched their breakfast. In a rare quiet corner of the hospital cafeteria, they regrouped, scanning notes, checking pagers, and exchanging silent expressions of worry and support. "So this is what being a doctor really means," JL muttered, rubbing his temples. "It's just the first day," Kim Sa Bai replied, though she looked equally shaken. "I wonder if we'll get used to this," Yi Young added softly. No one answered. The only response was the faint murmur of machines and the occasional overhead announcement summoning staff to another emergency. They all knew the truth. This was only the beginning. The road ahead would be long and unforgiving. But in the midst of uncertainty, they found strength in each other. Somehow, knowing they weren't alone made it all a bit more bearable. Part 2. Life in Rounds and Responsibilities. The second day started before dawn. The young residents were already dressed in scrubs, bleary-eyed but determined, as they reviewed patient charts before the 7 a.m. rounds. In this hospital, punctuality wasn't a virtue, it was a requirement. The professors expected perfection, and any mistake during a patient report could bring sharp reprimands. Yi Young arrived early, holding her tablet tightly. Today, she had to report on a high-risk patient with preeclampsia. The tension in the air was thick as the team gathered at the patient's bedside. Professor Tak Ki-an stood silently, arms crossed. "Start," he said curtly. Yi Young took a breath and began. Her voice was steadier than the day before. She gave a thorough summary, but stumbled over a medical term. Tak Ki-an narrowed his eyes. "Again," he demanded. She repeated the section, this time clearer. He gave no praise, only moved on to the next patient. Kim Sa Bai wasn't as lucky. Her report was interrupted twice for being disorganized. "Details," Professor Seo snapped. "We need specifics, not poetry." Sa Bai apologized quickly, her face flushing red. Meanwhile, Pyo Nam Kyung, shy and often overlooked, quietly delivered her report without a hitch. Her soft-spoken tone masked the effort it took to memorize every lab result and symptom. Outside the patient rooms, the residents shared glances of relief and dread. Rounds weren't just about checking patients. They were tests of knowledge, poise, and resilience. After the rounds, the work didn't stop. They had to update records, coordinate care, and handle calls from nurses. Yi Young was assigned to monitor a patient's contractions. She set the fetal monitor and watched the readings carefully. I didn't think it would be this intense, she whispered to Sabai, who nodded while scribbling notes. It's nonstop, and we haven't even had breakfast. By the time they could sit, it was already past noon. Their trays were cold again, but no one complained. The residents had learned to find small victories in surviving the morning. I didn't get yelled at today, Namkyung said with a small smile. That's 'cause you're a ninja, Sabai joked. Yi-young looked at them both and smiled. Rounds were brutal, but somehow, facing it together made it just a bit easier. Part 3. Challenges in Communication and Mistakes. Despite their growing familiarity with the hospital routine, mistakes were inevitable. For Oh Yi-young, one such mistake came during a patient handover. She had misunderstood a note in the patient's chart and gave incorrect information during her report. Professor Tak Kion's reaction was swift and cold. Do you know what happens when you give the wrong information? He snapped. People suffer. You can't afford to guess. Yi-young lowered her head in embarrassment. The silence from her peers made it worse. No one wanted to be the next target. In another instance, Kim Sa-bai faced a similar situation. A patient she had examined earlier complained of discomfort, but Sa-bai had dismissed it as minor. Hours later, the patient's condition worsened. The professor questioned her judgment in front of everyone. Sa-bai defended herself, but deep down, she began to doubt whether she was truly suited for this path. Pyo Nam-kyung struggled in her own quiet way. She often hesitated when speaking, and during one case presentation, she forgot a crucial lab result. The room grew heavy with disappointment. A senior nurse later pulled her aside and advised, if you want them to listen to you, speak like you mean it. The male resident, Jae-il, also wasn't immune to criticism. Though calm and composed, he once missed an urgent update from the ICU and it delayed patient care. The team had to scramble to make up for lost time. He apologized sincerely, but the guilt lingered. These small but significant mistakes weighed heavily on the team. Each resident reacted differently, some with tears, others with silence. But one thing was clear, communication in medicine wasn't just about words. It was about timing, accuracy, and emotional intelligence. That night, Yi-young sat alone in the on-call room, replaying the day's events in her mind. She wondered if she was cut out for this life. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Sa-bai. Hang in there. Tomorrow is another chance. Yi-young smiled faintly. Maybe she wasn't alone after all. Part 4. Emotional Burdens and Patient Complaints. The emotional toll of working in the obstetrics and gynecology ward became more visible with each passing day. For Pyo Nam-kyung, the weight of the job became especially hard to bear when she was assigned to care for a highly demanding patient. The woman complained constantly about the room temperature, the food, and even the tone of Nam-kyung's voice. No matter how gently she responded, it never seemed enough. One afternoon, the patient accused her of lacking empathy and even suggested she wasn't suited to be a doctor. Those words cut deep. Nam-kyung held her tears until she reached the stairwell, where she finally let them fall. Kim Sa-bai, who overheard the story later, confided in Nam-kyung. She said the same thing to me last week, she whispered. It's not you. But it wasn't just the harsh patients. It was the accumulation of small things, ungrateful glances, endless paperwork, missed meals, and the inability to rest even when they were off duty. Every interaction carried a level of emotional labor that no one had prepared them for. Oh Yi-young found herself involved in an emotionally charged case. A patient who had recently lost a twin during a complicated birth was now preparing for another cesarean. The mother clung to Yi-young's hand during a late-night checkup and asked, "Will this one be okay?" Yi-young wanted to say yes with confidence, but all she could offer was a firm nod and the promise that she would do her best. Meanwhile, Jae-il tried to act as the emotional anchor of the group. He often offered quiet support, sharing snacks, giving reassuring looks, and even stepping in when tensions ran too high. His calmness helped balance the emotional storms around him. The residents began to realize that while technical knowledge and skill were crucial, the strength to stay emotionally grounded was equally important. The nights were long, the complaints frequent, and the emotional energy often drained faster than their physical stamina. But still, they showed up. Each day, they wore their scrubs, clipped on their badges, and returned to the ward, not just to heal others, but to prove to themselves that they could endure. And when one of them faltered, the others reached out, not always with perfect words, but with presence. In a place full of pain and pressure, it was their silent support for each other that kept them going. Part 5. Trust, Growth, and New Hope. A week after their first day, something unexpected happened. Younjung was selected by Professor Tak Ki-yeon to accompany a patient on a high-risk emergency transfer to another hospital. It was a decision that surprised everyone, especially Younjung herself. "Why me?" she asked. "Because you've shown responsibility," the professor replied, without looking up from his chart. The trip was tense. The patient was anxious and in pain. Younjung held her hand the entire way, offering calm reassurances despite her own nervousness. When they safely arrived and handed over the patient, the relief was overwhelming. For the first time, she felt trusted, not just by her team, but by herself. Back at Jeonno Yulia, the atmosphere among the residents began to shift. Kim Sa-bai, once hot-headed, started taking time to explain procedures to the newer interns. Pyo Nam-kyung spoke up more confidently during morning rounds. Even Jae-il began to smile more, cracking dry jokes that lightened the mood. They were still exhausted, mistakes still happened, but something had changed. They had endured, they had learned. The moment that marked a true turning point came on payday. It was their first paycheck. The residents gathered at a nearby diner, laughing over bowls of ramen and sizzling platters. It wasn't about the money, it was about survival. About proving they could make it, even when every day pushed them to their limits. "I thought I wanted to quit every day," Younjung admitted. "But now I think I just want to keep going." "That's the spirit," Sa-bai grinned. "Now let's toast to surviving our first month." "To the next one," Jae-il added, raising his glass of soda. They clinked their drinks together. In the corner of the diner, the tired but hopeful faces of the 4 young residents glowed under the warm light. They still had far to go, but they were no longer alone, and no longer unsure. They were becoming doctors, not just in title, but in heart.